You're listening to the DVM Podcast Empire.
Now with over 1 million downloads.
1 million downloads.
Find us online at DVMPE.com.
100% free.
1,000,000% fan.
And now,
Push the button.
Is it possible that we have permitted ideology, political and economic philosophies, and governmental policies to keep us from considering the very real, everyday problems of our people?
So what if my feelings are hurt? Does that give me the right to prevent others from expressing their opinions?
Wait a second, Doc! Are you telling me that this sucker is nuclear?
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Mr. Anderson.
Don't push it.
Ho, 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 everybody. Welcome back to the Christmas episode of Push the Button, your number one podcast for all things that get you hot. I am your host, David Vox Mullen.
And I'm your other host, Mr. Anderson.
It was like,
Why?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anderson.
We haven't done that in a while.
Yeah, I just felt like, I actually haven't done that in quite a while because I've been off of work for a while. We've been on hiatus.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Coming back in January.
Oh, it felt good, too.
Yeah.
Good.
Did you have some nice time off? Did you rest up, heal up, you're getting stronger, faster, all that good stuff?
I've been hitting the gym every single day, training, eating. It's been fun. And obviously playing Mr. Mom. And it's nice that I can sort of tag team with my wife. And, I take the early morning shift because the kids are up at about 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
They're chirping. So I get up and let my wife sleep in. I just, get up, feed the kids, play with them for a few hours. Then she gets up, and then she lets me go to the gym. And, so on.
You're a better man than I.
Well, that's debatable, I guess.
Hey, I too am on hiatus this week. Well, not hiatus. I mean, you've had like a legit hiatus, but this is the first week I've had nothing going on, no real work, heavy load going on, and it's been, fighting to sleep in. And I'm not very good at pulling my weight lately, so I've been in the doghouse a bit. But I'm pulling it back. I'm I have to, clawing my way back.
A little date night, some flowers.
That's what I'm thinking. We'll
little vino, and then you guys can make up afterwards.
That's right. And then
you catch what I'm throwing down.
The audience will catch it by the music that's playing. Actually, it was nice. I took the kids to the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry yesterday, so that's always a fun joint and lots of neat stuff to see. And
very cool. Yeah. I went there when I was a kid, and I loved it.
It's so much neat stuff. And we took the coal mine tour, and we saw the Omnimax film. Actually, this was the D-Day at Normandy. It was really good. If you're interested in history or if you're a war buff or anything, this was a phenomenal documentary, narrated by Tom Brokaw. And it was really cool just to kind of hear some of the military maneuvers that actually went into play during the actual event of Normandy, the invasion on Normandy. And it was phenomenal, just absolutely amazing. Huh. And, it really gets you going. I mean, watching that and then seeing they've got that German U-boat on display there, and it kind of brings it all home for you, literally. And it was a good experience. It was very deep.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like something I'd love to do.
Yeah. Oh, it was good. But yeah, we had a great time, and then we went out to dinner afterwards at a very fine Italian establishment, and gorged ourselves sinfully. And paid for it the next day.
Oh boy!
It was funny, I don't drink a ton, but when I do, I feel it the next day.
Was that when you sent me your?
Yeah.
And I think this might be the alcohol.
Maybe I had to preface it. I think I've sent you 2 messages in the past week. that have said I may have been drinking. Just want to let you know. I'm on vacation, you know?
No, it's all good.
But yeah. And, so we had a nice weekend. It's not even a weekend. It was just a nice Monday we had. And getting ready for the holidays here, getting Christmas presents all wrapped up, and we're getting ready to do the holiday shuffle here at the Mullen household.
Yeah,
and,
I'd like to say, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry
holidays,
Christmas.
Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Solstice, Kwanzaa, Ramadan. Oh, no, Ramadan's not right now, is it?
I don't think so.
I don't know. But
when it happens, we want you to know.
And I have to say, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll tell you at a later date. That'll be
we'll do a Ramadan episode.
Yeah. But I have to say that personally, as an atheist, as a non-believer, I have no problem with saying Merry Christmas. I really don't.
Yeah.
I know what you mean when you say Merry Christmas to me, and in the end, it's all about communication, right?
Do you mean there's no war on Christmas, Ken?
Yeah, that's just, no, there is no war on Christmas. However, I do understand, like, I think some of the atheist groups, some of the secular groups out there, I get where they're coming from because they want to be all-inclusive.
Sure.
You say Merry Christmas, and to a Christian, to most Christians I know, and I just went back and forth with somebody on Instagram about this, like, Christmas is about Christ. It's Christ Mass. And for a Christian, yes, that's what the season is about.
Yeah.
I find it funny, though, that this somehow takes precedence over what would seem to be the more important Christian holiday, which is Easter.
Easter, yeah. I agree.
Right? So, yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I think sometimes these secular groups bark up trees that don't need barking up.
As long as they're pine trees.
Huh? Well, you know.
No, it's interesting that you say that because, and that's refreshing to hear. I really have to say, I think that's cool. I mean, there's bad apples in every group, period. And the ones who kind of, I don't like it when Christians do it, so I can't imagine that you like it when atheists do it, where you try to use the law to establish what you personally want or your offense, whatever makes you offended. I don't mean you personally, I just mean you, mankind in general.
Yeah.
It really ticks me off when either side tries to, legislate, for comfort of offense or opinion or whatever. And it's like, really?
We live in America.
Yeah.
It's, you know what? If you're offended by something that I say, I can't help that. Sorry, like that's your fault.
If it was
it's your problem to deal with.
If it was the turn of the century, like the turn of the 19th, like even if it was like the middle of the 1800s, and some preacher was out there, saying Merry Christmas, everybody. People who didn't believe in God wouldn't be like, screw that guy,
right?
or let's get the judge to keep him from saying Merry Christmas to me. And vice versa, if somebody didn't believe in God, they weren't going to be like, let's get the judge to make him say Happy Christmas. I mean, it just doesn't happen. We didn't think like that back then.
And I mean, I guess, to me, as a non-believer, I have this Christian that says, to me, Christmas is about Christ. Okay, I get that. That's for you. For me, it's not. It's just about family and friends and music and good food and maybe some gifts here and there, which I just have to say personally, I think the gifting thing has gotten way out of hand. And this year, my wife and I decided we weren't going to do anything at all, except for we bought a couple things for the kids. But truth be told, they care more about the boxes that the presents come in than the actual.
Oh, at this age, absolutely.
So yeah, they're 11 months old, so they're not going to.
They'll chew on the corners of the boxes before they look at what you said.
But I guess you'd have to take that further and say, like, well, then do you avoid saying Thursday, because Thursday actually stems from Thor's Day, which was a god that people worshipped at one time, and I guess there are probably a few people out there that still do. So, you know what I mean? Like,
I know a bunch of Marvel fans who probably still do.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a little better.
Okay.
I'm gauging my comedy. I've been on vacation, so it's like I'm working on it. That's what the real purpose of this podcast is, Ken, just to test out my bits. If they're not funny, I don't use them live.
Well, I like it. That would be one that I probably would shy away from.
Thank you, sir.
Anyway, I digress.
Well, no, I don't want to digress. I think you're taking us down the right track. I think it's interesting that we get so we get our panties kind of bunched up in a knot ball because, we don't like it when somebody says something to us or whatever. And I want to touch more on the fact that we legislate. There's these people that, there's these atheist groups who try to legislate so that nativity scenes can't be in an area. And vice versa, where, there's Christian groups who try to legislate and say, if it's a public area, I should be able to still put my nativity scene there. And it's kind of off the wall. And we slightly touched on this stuff when we talked about does religion belong in government? And I think we had a resounding no, on both sides for different reasons, but agreeably no. Very reminiscent of our founding fathers. But you mentioned something to me off air, and you wanted to talk about this today, and I think this is a great subject. But we'll get into greater detail. But the Ten Commandments, famously posted on the wall of the Supreme Court, and you said to me today that those are not even the same Ten Commandments that were given to the Jews. And it was news to me. So I was curious if you had some information on that, and we would kind of dig into that a little bit, because this is interesting information to me.
I absolutely do. And
for the record, not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, but if you hear my dogs barking, I'm sorry. I can't stop them. They're crazy dogs.
That's okay. And if you hear my children screaming, I can't help that either.
All right, go ahead.
But okay, so this is sort of frustrating to me.
Sure.
That when I hear people say that I still regularly hear, and I was just going back and forth with somebody on Al Snow's Instagram account, which is probably an inappropriate place to go back and forth with somebody.
And just for the record, I'm a big fan of Al Snow. I love the guy. I actually follow him on Instagram. But, man, he is posting a lot of bicep selfies lately. Have you noticed that?
I give him so much shit about his selfies. Literally, every time I see him, like... I
only joke because I'm jealous as all get out, because, wow. I mean,
No. Don't ever go down that path, folks. Okay? It's just not a good path to take in life. He and David Hero are two of my very good friends. They're very good friends. And they have this little competition going on back and forth between one another. They have this hashtag, the competition continues.
Oh, jeez.
Every time they post a selfie of themselves at the gym, working out, doing bicep curls, whatever. And I always, hey, every time I see them and I'm in their presence together, I'm like, so, how many gay selfies are you guys going to take today?
Oh, jeez.
And when I say gay, I don't mean homosexual, I just mean gay. In the colloquial sense.
Happy.
Yeah.
How many happy selfies are you taking today?
Stupid. So anyway.
Just for your interest, ladies and gentlemen, our email address is pushthebuttonpodcast@gmail.com.
So when you were offended by the word that I just used,
gosh,
sorry about your luck.
Here we go.
So
Al Snow's Instagram, you were flaming on with some. See, that's not freedom.
Flaming, yeah.
You got into
sort of a little flame war going back and forth. I only, posted a few times, and I said specifically, like, I posted once, and then somebody responded in such a beautiful, humble, loving, caring Christian way.
Oh, when you set it up like that, I know it's coming.
Just, flames shooting out. And I signed off with the, Your anger runs deep, young Skywalker.
Yeah.
So, anyways, and then I responded once to his criticisms, and I said, look, this is not the appropriate place to do this. You can use your power of deduction and logic and reason to figure out a way to carry on this conversation elsewhere in a more appropriate environment. Anyway, but somebody posted there that, the Old Testament is still relevant today and should be followed more closely or something to that effect. And this is sort of frustrating to me because most Christians I hear this all the time, that the Old Testament is A, still relevant, and B, should be followed to the letter. And they don't know that the Ten Commandments that we're familiar with aren't actually the Ten Commandments. And I'll get into that in greater detail. So, this is displayed on courthouses, so on and so forth. And the Ten Commandments, if you read in the Bible, and I'm reading from the New International Version, so obviously the translation is slightly different between different texts, different versions of the Bible. There are how many hundreds of variations of the Bible?
Oh, just tons.
So, I'll just quickly run through this. Exodus 20. Now, there's a header that says the Ten Commandments above chapter 20, verse 1. That header, where it says the Ten Commandments, was not in the original text.
Okay.
That is something that was later put in by publishers.
Sure.
Sort of break things down. So when it says, and God spoke all these words. Verse 2, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations. Now that seems like a moral concept, to punish. I just think about punishing your great-great-great-grandchildren for something that... Anyway, but I digress.
Well, right or wrong, he did start it off by saying, I'm a jealous God.
Well, and I'm going to punish your children, their children's children, their children's children, their children's children.
Yeah, that
seems a little... That's stiff.
That's vindictive.
That's stiff right off the bat.
Yeah.
Next is, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Next, honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land of the Lord your God is giving you. Next, you shall not murder. Now, in other texts, in other interpretations, this is just, you shall not kill.
Right.
Which, you shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, and you shall not covet your neighbor's house, or your neighbor's wife, his manservant, maidservant, his ox, donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, we discussed this in our earlier podcast, the religion and politics one, and you and I, together, determined that only two out of
two of them, I think, yeah.
2 of the 10 were actually relevant to our law, and even those 2 are sort of questionable. Is it always wrong to kill?
Right,
no.
and therefore maybe not a good source to base our legislation from.
Right. That's sort of what we determined. That was our interpretation.
If only people listened.
If only. That's not if you're playing baseball, 2 out of 10 is probably a pretty good average, but
right.
we're not playing baseball here.
Nope.
So, now we would, no, okay, so.
But those are the 10 Commandments that we all know.
Those are the 10 Commandments that we all know. Now, there is no separation between those commandments that I just read and the next. I don't know how many there are. I didn't sit down and actually count them.
Right.
They say there's 613 laws in the Old Testament. 10 of which we say are the most important. Now,
was it like a countdown, like a top 10? I'm Casey
Kasem.
With God's top 10.
But between Exodus 20 and 32, we are given a cavalcade of other laws and impositions and expectations by God. Like we get the manual for slavery, how it's okay to own another human being, how...
What's the actual text?
Well, the text is... I'll read it. I will read it, because this to me...
I hope so, because you have a tendency to paraphrase. That's why I want to know.
I read it again today, and it boggles my mind that people say, like, oh, no. What they meant back then was, it was just indentured servitude. Well, I disagree, and here's why. So, Exodus 21, it says, Hebrews and servants, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go free, without paying anything. If he comes alone, he's to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she's to go with him. If his master gives him a wife, so if I give my slave a wife, which is a little questionable practice, if you ask me. If I say, here you go, here's your wife, that's just weird to me. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free.
Interesting.
But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, and do not want to go and live free, which, just think about that. You know, you're married to your wife, you have these beautiful children together, you're toiling away in the fields or whatever you're doing.
You gain your freedom, and your
wife
says,
hey, you have the ability to go free, but they stay with me. What would you do? Now, personally, I would hope that in that situation I would say, you know what, I would prefer to stay here with them because I love them. So it's sort of some trickery, if you ask me.
Let's take a jump off here.
Okay.
Because I love this stuff. I think it's fascinating. Just historically, I think it's fascinating. When I think of ancient Egypt, when I think of ancient Rome, things that are not necessarily Hebrew-based, there was if I'm correct, there was a widespread slavery. If you watch, Gladiator or Spartacus or any of that stuff, those gladiators were slaves. They were purchased. Some would argue that even today, professional wrestlers have been indentured servants. But
I think in a lot of those cases too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of those slaves were criminals. Right?
Could be. Very well could be. I'm just saying, but slavery in that era of mankind, it seemed that it wasn't necessarily religious based, if that makes any sense. I mean, I have no doubt that there were rulers and kings and councils who had no religion, who were dealing in the slave trades and things like that. So to me, I'm not trying to say, everybody's doing it, because that's the worst excuse. But what I'm saying is it's obviously something that's extremely commonplace, and I'm curious if if because like this is all we know as mankind, when these laws were being established to the Jews, I'm assuming this is, they were saying, hey, when you're doing this, do it this way. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I'm just...
No, that's the common argument that I hear, and I reject that. I really do. I reject the idea that, just as I reject the idea that the Jews wandered around the desert thinking that it was perfectly okay to murder each other for years and years and years. And then Moses went up and convened with God on Mount Sinai.
Okay,
said,
so are you
whoa, wait a second. You can't kill people.
Right, so are you implying that slavery did not exist before these rules were established?
No, I am saying that slavery did exist. I'm pretty sure that slavery did exist. However, I'm God giving a list of rules to people. I might choose to say, you got the whole thing wrong. Do away with that.
Sure. We've talked about that before. So your point of contention with God is that he didn't say, you know what, since I'm God, I'm going to make a new rule, stop slavery.
Yeah. I'm going to educate you. It's not okay to own another human being and treat them as a piece of farm equipment.
Sure. No, absolutely. I understand exactly what you're saying now. Okay.
And then, this was for the time and the people wouldn't understand. Bullshit, in my opinion. Sorry, that's stiff, but...
No, hey.
You're God.
That's what this show is about, man. That's what
you're laying the law down. This is what I do want you to do, and this is what I don't want you to do. And what I don't want you to do is treat other people like garbage and whip them and yada yada yada.
Okay. So you're saying if God is real, you're not down with the fact that at that point in history he didn't say slavery is wrong.
I just think that
you have every right to feel that way. That's why I just want to make sure I understand where you're coming from.
Well, what I'm taking away is that for a book that is touted as being the source of morality,
right?
One of the most immoral things that we have come to realize is the subject of slavery. Mm-hmm. And the fact that this moral guidepost wasn't able to say this stuff is not okay. Jesus Christ never says anything about slavery. Never says like, nope, not, we can't do that. Paul, who I would argue that is basically the basis for Christianity, and we'll get into that later.
Sure.
It was Paul's interpretations after Christ died, supposedly, that...
No, he's lived forever.
That laid the foundation for the Christianity that people practice today. Because,
sure.
Christ said certain things, and then Paul came along and said, well, Christ said this, but what he really meant was this. Mm-hmm. And it's through his interpretations that we...
Well, I mean, there is something to be... I love this. I love this train of thought. There's definitely something to be said for... when we talked about it in previous episodes, when Jesus talked... When he mentioned slavery, and he was using the analogy of, when a slave and a master, blah, 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 blah. I don't remember the exact text, but it was along the lines where, and we got into a discussion about whether or not he was advocating for slavery or he was just explaining something that people could understand because it was a common practice. I'm reminded of the story of the prostitute who was being stoned, and Jesus said, "Hey, you without any sin, throw the first rock." Why do that if he advocated for, treating people like meat? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because in my opinion, the whole book is bipolar. It's back and forth.
Oh man, what a great line.
Eye for an eye.
Bible.
Eye for an eye. Turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
Eye for kill the Jew. It's just kill everybody who's not a Jew. Don't kill anybody who.
Well, there's a lot of people who would argue that the reason why Jesus did the things he did, and I can't say yes or no to this. I'm just saying I've heard this argument, and I'm sure you have too. Is that so many people took the things that allegedly God had said in the Old Testament through man, and we're just getting it way wrong. And Jesus was kind of like, no, this is what it is. I definitely see the bipolarness that you're talking about. I mean, I would be an absolute fool if I didn't say, yeah, I get it. God leads, people to just slaughter thousands, and then in the same breath says, don't kill. I mean, I get that. That makes my brain hurt too.
Yeah. So, okay, well, I don't want to get into the Jesus thing later, but I think we'll get into that a little later, so I don't want to sort of...
Yeah, no, that's fine. This is such a... I'll be honest and say I'm one of those ding-dong Christians who never spent enough time reading the Old Testament. I've read things here and there when I was younger, and obviously stuff that didn't make sense to me, I just skipped over, admittedly. And now as I'm older and I love history, and now I find I wish I would have spent more time with that. And it's beautiful that you do. So it's kind of like, Ken, teach me more.
Well, and as I said, we'll get into this in a little bit, but there are about 3 or 4 key verses that are attributed to something that Jesus said in the New Testament that specifically lead me to question why the Old Testament isn't read and followed. But again,
okay,
we'll get into that a little bit.
I hear you.
So
moving on.
So anyway, now we would, I think, logically conclude that the set of 10 commandments, which ended up making its way into the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay.
Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Ark of the Covenant was a box that was commissioned by God. God gave Moses, who then gave his people, exact measurements and adornments that were to be put on this box. You can see a copy of it in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I was just going to say, if you've watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, you've seen it.
And this is actually, from what I gather, I think that's a pretty accurate, because there are very specific instructions laid out in Exodus on how to produce this box.
Yeah.
It is to be this high, this long, this wide, cherubim on top, 2 poles to carry it, and it's to house the 10 Commandments, this covenant with God. And so one would assume that the 10 Commandments, the tablets that make it into that box, are the 10 Commandments. Am I right in assuming that would be?
That was the assumption I always had.
Okay, so.
And if you stared into it, you would melt if you were a Nazi.
Yes, if you're a Nazi.
That's right.
Don't look at it. Actually, I think Harrison Ford's face would have melted too if he would have closed his eyes.
I think it's melting now.
He closed his eyes.
Damn it, Ken.
Exodus 20. Moses heads up Mount Sinai to visit the great and powerful Oz.
By himself.
By himself. Always by himself. Actually, it's interesting because it says that God told him, hey, go down and tell everybody else they're not allowed to come up here, but bring Aaron with you. And Aaron was the high priest at the time. So it says that, and then later on it says that Aaron was down building idols for people, and, well, more on that later. So I'm not sure if it was God, if it was Moses, Aaron, and God, or if it was just Moses and God, but this is another reason why I think this book is bipolar. So Exodus 20, verses 2 through 17, as I stated before, the 10 Commandments, there's a header there that says 10 Commandments. That was inserted at a later date. It wasn't in the original text. I gave you the 10 Commandments already, or what we know, or what we call the 10 Commandments commonly today. However, right after that, you get this, between chapters 20 and 32, it's just all this stuff about slavery, about theft of property, that you should kill sorceresses.
Early Americans were doing that, right?
Kill witches. Yeah. Kill people who have, we kill people who have sex with animals, don't mistreat aliens from other lands, which I find interesting since,
that's the basis of all of our wars.
And many of these people are later slaughtered en masse at the behest of the big guy himself. We got construction of altars for sacrifices because God needed you to kill a goat in order to appease him, which I don't get. Specific instructions for building lampstands, the tabernacle, which was a tent that was used for worship, which type of garments the priests are to wear, etc., 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 etc. Again, there has been absolutely no usage of the word 10 Commandments other than that which was inserted at a later date by publishers. There's no usage of the words 10 Commandments between Exodus 20 and Exodus 32.
How do we know that any of the commandments were placed into the ark? Does it say that?
So I'm going to get to that.
Okay, sorry. I don't mean to go... See,
no, that's fine.
You're just taking me down a road, so I'm like, oh, what about this? What about that?
That's fine. So then it says in Exodus 32:15, Exodus chapter 32, verse 15, Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. Now, like I said, right before this, God informs Moses that at this very moment, the people, God and Moses are talking. God gives all these commandments for 12 chapters. They say there are 613 laws in the Old Testament. I don't know how many are here. Like I said, I didn't count them. There have to be at least a couple hundred.
Sure.
At least 100 of different laws and impositions by God. But at the end of this, God says, hey, by the way, just so you know, at this very moment, the people are at the base of the mountain worshiping a golden calf. Now, I'm going to kill everybody. They're going to feel my vengeance. They are going to feel my wrath. And Moses pleads with him and says, God, please just, he reasons with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets God to say, okay. He relents and he says, I'm not going to kill everybody. So what does Moses do? Moses very promptly marches down the hill, back to camp, sees the golden calf, the singing, the dancing, the worshiping going on, and smashes these most important documents that were published by God himself. He takes the tablets and he smashes them at his feet because he's so pissed off. Because, wouldn't you do that? You just received the most important documents in life.
Right.
From God, from the creator of everything that you see around you. So what do? You smash them at your feet.
And to have God say, hey, by the way, this is what's going on. I'm going to kill everybody. And you say, God, no, please don't. And then I go down and see it. Then I get pissed off and then break everything I just worked on.
Well, not only does he break everything that he just worked on, he trashes the entire camp like a freaking drill sergeant tossing a boot camp barracks. And then tells the Levites, strap on your swords, go back and forth through camp. This is a quote right from the text. Strap on swords and go back and forth through camp from one end of camp to the other, each killing his brother, friend, and neighbor. Thusly, ignoring the 7th commandment in that first list and leaving about 3,000 dead in the process. So he ignores the 7th commandment in that long list. There's, like I said, there's at least 100, if not more. The 7th one was, don't kill anybody. So he goes down and he kills everybody. Or he instructs his people to kill each other.
See, I'm wondering, and again, this is just my brain kind of green light thinking here, but I'm wondering if this was God saying, these people are not my followers. They're not worshiping me or whatever. They're so offensive to me. I have to end them. Moses says, no, God. You said he pleads with God or whatever.
Yeah.
And God says, all right. And then Moses goes down, and then maybe he too is offended and realizes that God was right. Again, I want this very clear. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I don't know from the third party of you reading to text what was really going. Again, I'm trying to go from the mindset that these events actually took place. I'm sure that in your mind there's even credibility of whether or not that even happened. What I'm saying is if I'm working under the mindset of these events actually transpired in the history, because I know of other stories and instances where God says, I'm going to do this, and man has come to God and says, please don't do this, and God says, I have to do this, and man says, please don't. God says, okay, and then turns out it should have happened anyway. Right. So I wonder if this is a weird, twisted way of trying to convey that.
Well, yeah, and I feel like that's what is conveyed. It's
okay.
He pleaded with God, and he reasoned with me. He said, these are the people that you let out of Egypt, and so on and so forth, and he lays out this case. He presents his case to God, and God finally says, okay, I'm chill. And then he goes down, and the fact that he smashes the tablets in the first place is just strange to me.
Well, I wonder if he felt, again, if I'm working off the assumption that this is a real human being and that this is events that took place, I'm wondering if he felt that he did all of this work for these people who clearly have no interest in it. And I could definitely understand him getting pissed off, frustrated, feeling like he just wasted his time.
Yeah, but pissed off to the point where you not only trash everything. I can see that. I can see him getting pissed off. Okay, maybe in a fit of rage. Maybe I think the guy in this case needs anger management counseling.
Sure.
Or could have benefited from anger management.
Right.
But, okay, he trashes everything. He turns the camp over, burns, throws the calf into the fire, yada, yada, tells everybody. Because at one point, this is another interesting thing, just a side note, that Aaron, this high priest that supposedly was up on the mountain with Moses, but was down at the base of the mountain making golden idols for people at the same time. I don't get it. Maybe there was some Star Trek stuff going on there where he was beamed up intermittently. But, so apparently at some point Aaron says to the people, they come to him and say make us a god, make us an idol. And Aaron says, okay, well, give me your earrings. And so he collects all the golden earrings from people. Now imagine how many gold earrings this guy would have had to have acquired in order to melt those down and make a golden calf out of it.
Yeah.
That people could worship and that they built an altar for. But that's kind of a silly aside. It's another thing that just makes me scratch my head when I read this text.
Well, I mean, we don't know how they dressed. We don't know what their jewelry was. We don't know any of that.
Maybe they had some giant hoop earrings. I don't know. Who knows?
Maybe they had giant gold gauges. Who knows?
Could be. Ones that you could put a Coke can through or something.
Right.
So, but anyway, so, the fact that he trashed the camp, but then slaughtered everybody, that's maybe taking things a little too far. Because they were praying to they were ignorant. They were not stupid. They were uneducated. They didn't have this information because God would only speak to Moses up on the hill. He couldn't, for whatever reason, say okay, everybody gather around here. Here's the deal. When you work for a company, your boss rolls out this new thing. Usually they have a giant company-wide meeting and they say they have a presentation. Here's what's happening. Here's what we're doing. God apparently couldn't do this. He only had to speak to Moses and possibly Aaron, but he could only speak to one person. And again, this is another thing that irritates me. Through the history of the Bible, it's always one person.
Right.
It's God to Paul. And then Paul goes and tells everybody else, this is what he said, and this is what he means. Moses, this is what he said, this is what he means. Now, in my opinion, what's more likely? That this God would only speak to one person, or that this one person was a charismatic leader who wanted to control everybody and said that he was talking to God.
Sure.
Wrote all this shit down and said, here's what you need to do. And, incidentally, a lot of the commandments, a lot of the laws have to do with, building things out of gold and all these fine substances, and this is what you're to give to your priests and your leaders.
Yeah, things that seem to benefit the society more than
Well, they benefit the priesthood.
Yeah.
And those in charge more than they do the average people.
Yeah. No, I definitely see that, and I've heard that debate before, and it's definitely a thing that gets you thinking.
So now, moving forward from this, right? He trashes the place, kills everybody, and then he reconvenes with God. And in Exodus 34, it says the new stone tablets. Again, something that was inserted at a later date. The Lord said to Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning, and then come up on Mount Sinai." So Moses goes up, and God proceeds to tell him this. Well, first of all, God says, "I'll do it for you."
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'll put it on there for you. And then he proceeds to say this. And this is a little lengthy, but I'm going to get through it.
That's right.
Exodus 34, verse 10. Chapter 34, verse 10. Then the Lord said, "I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people, I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I command you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land where you are going, or they will be a snare among you. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and cut down their Asherah poles. Do not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." So that sort of translates to, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," sort of. Mm-hmm. Next, verse 15. "Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves," so don't make treaty with other people that live in the land. Just keep it amongst yourselves. You're the chosen people. Everybody else is schlock. "Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves to their gods and sacrifice to them, they will invite you, and you will eat their sacrifices. And when you choose some of their daughters as wives for your sons, and those daughters prostitute themselves to their gods, they will lead your sons to do the same." Next, "Do not make cast idols." Next, "Celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Abib, for in that month you came out of Egypt. The first offspring of every," this is next, the first offspring of every womb belongs to me, including all of the firstborn males of your livestock, whether from herd or flock. Redeem the firstborn donkey with a lamb, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem all your firstborn sons. Your firstborn sons belong to me. Next is, "No one is to appear before me empty-handed. 6 days you shall labor, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest you must rest." Verse 22, "Celebrate the Feast of Weeks with the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year all your men are to appear before the sovereign Lord, the God of Israel. I will drive out nations before you and enlarge your territory, and no one will covet your land when you go up 3 times each year to appear before the Lord your God." Verse 25, "Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. And do not let any of the sacrifice from the Passover feast remain until morning." You got to eat everything. You got to consume everything in the Passover feast. "Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God." So when you go to harvest your crops, the best of everything that you harvest, you must take it to an altar and burn it, because that's what the Lord requires. Mm-hmm. "Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk." Very important. Very important that you don't do this.
It's very interesting.
"Then the Lord said to Moses, write down these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." Moses was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water. and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments.
Wow. So basically, these are the commandments.
These are the 10 Commandments. Observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Every firstborn male is mine. Do not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Could you imagine if these were the 10 Commandments that were applied to church house wall or courthouse walls?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, Christians don't know this, and
It's very interesting. So the real question is it more likely that publishers, so to speak, have chosen to use the original information and calling it the 10 Commandments?
Well, what my personal opinion is, what my personal opinion is, once again, our own moral intuition comes in and takes over and says, these ones right here, I think
it's easier to do these 10. I'm just saying.
Yeah, these make more sense. These ones right here make more sense, and they were the first ones that appear in the text. So let's just use those ones. But these ones that I just read to you are the ones that make their way into the box.
No, but that's what I'm saying. These seem easier to do.
Right.
I mean, it's easier to do this stuff.
But what I'm saying is that these last 10 that I just read to you are the ones that make it into the Ark of the Covenant, where God kills somebody for touching because the at one point the Ark, the people that are carrying it, somebody loses their balance, trips or something to that effect, and a guy goes to, they're instructed not to touch the Ark of the Covenant or they'll die. And at some point, somebody trips, and they go to save the Ark of the Covenant from touching the dirt, and they're killed for it. They actually put their hands on the Ark, and God strikes them dead. So this box contains, what are regarded as the most important documents in human history. And yet, these are not the 10 Commandments that we're familiar with.
And where is the Ark now?
Yeah, and nobody knows where the hell that is. Because, in my opinion, it didn't really exist. This is just a story.
It's probably in that big warehouse in the United States.
It could be. Yeah. Along with all the alien bodies.
That's right. Well, I'm gonna throw something way off the wall, and all our Christian listeners are gonna get so pissed at me, but I don't care. There is the concept that to our world, God is an alien. We may have been created in His image, but we are not His kind. And there is the belief out there that God is alien. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So the burning of your the best of your labors, the burning of them on an altar. I remember reading somewhere in the Old Testament where God said that the smell was sweet unto God. Because he's an alien. You know what I mean? Just some weird thing.
Right. But it's still, I mean, if that's the argument.
Oh, it's not so much an argument. I just like throwing these alternate lines of thought.
Right. I know I've heard that before. And if that's the argument, well, then that throws out the whole God created everything in 6 days. Like, if this person is an alien from a different planet, then.
Here's what's and again,
the heavens and the earth, and
I'm not saying that is or is not what happened. I'm just saying that it's out there, and it's one that I'm always intrigued by. I do think of, I think it was, I don't know if it was Ponce de Leon or was it Coronado or somebody who basically was aware of a tribe's belief in a god, and he successfully convinced them that he was that god. And I think he took all their gold or something. I think it was Coronado. It might have been Ponce de Leon, but it was one of the famous, voyagers of the world's history.
Yeah.
Explorers who, I think it was the Aztecs or the Incans or whatever, who he convinced that he was their god that they had worshipped. And because he had somehow gotten access to the lore. and I wonder, if there is any slight possibility. We are losing so many listeners right now. I know it, but if there's any slight possibility that there was this some sort of alien entity that came to this area in space and time, and could have pulled that off.
Well, I mean, again, as an atheist, which I do not assert that no God exists. I just say that there's no evidence to support that
right
assertion. I would say the same with the alien thing. Like, it's possible. But
it's weird.
I've seen just as much evidence to support that theory as I have to see.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
To support this other theory.
Yeah.
So
Christians have the Bible. Conspiracy theorists have Roswell. So there you go.
Yeah, right. And what was that guy's name? Art Bell?
Art Bell, Coast to Coast.
I remember I used to listen to that guy pretty regularly.
Yeah.
Or somewhat regularly.
But you were on the road a lot too, right? I suppose you'd probably hear it.
No, I think it was even before I was on the road. It was before I remember somebody turned me on to it right after high school. And I was like, you know what, this guy, he makes some good points. He definitely makes some good points. And then you do some digging and like, is it realistic to think that like these aliens traversed the galaxy to come here to just fuck with our cattle?
I don't know. It's hard to tell whether they're the Illuminati or the the Greys or the what's the other one? The reptilians.
Sure. And it's also interesting that as our mythology has changed throughout the course of human history, these, if you go way back in human history, gray aliens were never talked about. Nobody ever saw gray aliens. Nobody ever at least documented it. It was other, beings or whatever, like other monsters. And then as, a writer somewhere wrote a story about these little gray men with big almond-shaped heads and almond-shaped eyes and yada, 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 and long fingers and short little stature. More and more people suddenly see these gray aliens.
Yeah, I remember, it would have been in the early 80s. You and I are kind of similar in age, so I'm sure you probably remember that they had commercials for like these Time Life books, and they talked about all that stuff. It was like there was this Time Life book series in the early 80s that was all about, learn how, these people from all over the world who never met each other have these same stories under hypnosis of these, they all look the same.
Interesting. And sort of interesting that people from different cultures and different faith backgrounds, when they have these quote-unquote near-death experiences, they always tend to see their God.
Yeah, right. It's a good point. And to try to bring it back on track here, the whole thing about make sure when you do kill an animal, when you slaughter an animal, you use everything. As Americans, we're taught that the Native Americans were big on that. We're real big on that.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting considering it's a whole other half of the globe. Like, where did that tradition come from them?
Right. Well,
because it's in line with the same thing. Like, where did that come from? That concept obviously is not foreign.
Because that concept certainly wasn't a Jewish concept. I mean, they just kill a goat and just burn it. They don't use any of it.
Yeah.
God apparently needs you to burn it in order for him to consume it somehow. And I'm being flip here.
No, but I mean, if you get into...
I apologize for that to a degree, but...
No, you don't have to.
Is there really, I think... In a way,
what if God only exists in the molecular structure of the planet? And
now you're talking garbage.
You need that's garbage.
Now you're going to get into this. What's his name? The Indian guy or whatever. The consciousness is just at the quantum level. The consciousness is. What the hell's his name? He's
is that the Ravi Shankar guy?
He's the guy that's like the spiritualist to the stars. And he always talks about quantum physics. He's a quantum physicist or whatever. Like Oprah uses him and like Ellen uses him. All these big celebrities
Wow, is it that?
I can't think of him. He speaks in Deepities all the time, like words that...
Chopra or
Deepak Chopra, that's it. Deepak.
Yeah.
He always talks about quantum physics, and it's like, he uses these big words that sound really scientific.
To the people who
sound
don't.
extraordinarily profound, but when you break them down, they have absolutely no meaning. They mean nothing.
Oh yeah, like well, you mentioned, Art Bell and George Norrie replaced him on Coast to Coast, and it's when they'd get guys on there, and it used to blow my mind because they would talk about things, and I imagine that's how I sound to any atheist, but I would hear them talk about science that they're using, alleged science, to justify, why you can communicate with people telepathically across the planet, and it's like, yeah, I don't know if you're using real science or not. So yeah, I imagine that we as Christians probably sound like that we don't know what the heck we're talking about.
Here's just an example of a Deepak Chopra, just a gem from Deepak.
You're dripping with sarcasm.
The ego self-interacts with essential silence. I have no idea what that means. The ego self-interacts with essential silence. Another one is, our consciousness heals subjective boundaries. Wholeness alleviates cosmic self-knowledge. These are just
words.
Word salad. It's garbage. And people just, that sounds amazing.
The circular blackness of oneself is often tied to the universal consciousness of one.
Is that another one that he said?
No, I literally just made those words up.
Well, it sounded just like something he would say. So that was pretty good.
Thank you.
That was pretty good.
And then we'll make millions on people's interpretation of that. That's great.
3 cheers for David Box Mullen, everybody. Hip, hip.
Hooray.
Hip, hip.
All right, that's enough.
Okay.
All right, so moving on.
Okay, let's move on. So in my humble opinion, after scouring my theological observations, and again, I'm not a theologian.
But you're getting there.
And this is another problem with me. The fact that this collection of documents, requires a 6-year degree in order to understand it or to make any sense of it that's crazy to me.
Well, and
couldn't you literally don't do this, don't do that? The Jains, which is another religion that really is a peaceful religion. The Jainism says, do not harm another living being. Basically, don't harm another living being, period. That's it.
Yeah.
These people wear cheesecloth on their faces so that they don't inhale bugs. They will intentionally sidestep a mound of ants that they encounter on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
These people are truly, they won't kill anything. They'll just, they are vegetarians, they're vegans.
But aren't we somewhere kind of imprinted with some of that, though?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, scientifically, we look at animals, we call it instinct, right? But, there's that part of me that, I don't want to step on spiders. I don't want to kill living things.
Oh, yeah.
And on the few occasions where I have, there's that little tiny voice in my head that just was like, you killed that thing. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
But so is that something that comes from a religified, Americanized, canonized thing we just do to our children and generation after generation? Or is there something to our consciousness that we're kind of you know what I mean?
I think it's a little of both, because I remember as a little kid thinking it was pretty funny to take a magnifying glass to
I've done it.
Anthill.
I've done it.
Somebody showed me oh, look at this, and you burn the little ants while they were crawling, and then now I look back and I go, that was messed up.
Yeah.
I would never teach my kid to do that today, and I would, I can't experience what an ant feels, but I know what I would feel in that situation, and
yeah.
Anyway, I sort of think it's both. I think it's sort of our, I won't want to say imprinted, but, that ingrained, that, what did you say the word was? Instinct.
Instinct,
right?
yeah.
Sort of our instinct. But again, I think that's like sort of an evolutionary thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Very interesting. Anyway.
And I also think that we compound our data, from our fathers did things that we will not do to our children because we've learned from their mistakes.
Right.
Hopefully, so on and so forth.
That's very true. Very true.
So anyway.
So what way does that, by that line of thinking, would that not imply in the coming generations, the future generations will be that much better?
I hope so. I think so. Yeah, I believe that's true.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I think we're getting there every year. If you ask people 20 years ago, what do you think about gays? I mean, your reaction would probably be a lot different than what you would receive if you asked that question today from most people.
Sure.
Hey, today most people would say, like, back 20 years ago, they'd probably say, like, take them out back and put a bullet in their head.
Yeah.
And today, you know what? Hey, to each their own,
Yeah, well, and to hear something like that's horrible. But to hear something like that and to know that people said that, but how many of them would really do it?
Well, right.
Do you know what I mean?
I don't know.
Oh, there was definitely people who did that stuff.
If given the freedom to do it,
yeah.
If we allowed that type of behavior, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to sound, ignorant. I've heard people say things, and I'm like, you know what? You're so full of crap. You would never do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we have a tendency, I think, as human beings to sometimes overstate what we would do in a given situation. Like, well, if anybody ever said that to me, I always heard, if I was in boot camp and a drill sergeant got in my face, I'd whoop his ass. No, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You'd get in line and do your push-ups like everybody else.
Yeah.
So anyway, do I sound like vitriolic today, or
you know what? You're
fired up.
You're heated. You're heated, and I like that. And that's good conversation. And I love taking the ride with you, man. This is good. It's one of those things. I learned more about the Old Testament from you than I did from anything I learned in church.
And again, this is we
Which is a sad state, by the way. What's wrong, church?
When we decided to do this episode, I knew this stuff. I had to go back and reread it, and rereading it just
lights you up.
Just my brain hurts.
What is it that gets you upset, though? Is it? I just feel like people are being lied to.
That I think people are being intentionally misled by their churches. Like, they're not telling them this information that we just presented to you.
Yeah.
Nobody knows that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's right there. All you got to do is pick up the Bible and just flip to Exodus 20 and read from Exodus 20 to Exodus 34. It's 14 chapters.
I want to bring a church leader on, whether it's a priest, a pastor, a father, a deacon. I don't care. The guy who washes the bathroom at the church. I don't care. I want somebody to talk about the simple thing that I've read Exodus. Okay, I don't remember some of this stuff.
Right.
I can't for a second believe that my fellow Christian brothers and sisters, not all of them, not generalizing, but I'm sure a fair amount of them has also read these stories. Mm. And so why is that not being discussed? Why is this not being looked at? I mean, or have we already answered away all this for decades, and so it's just no longer talked about or discussed? To me, that's like, okay, well, those are good questions. I really think they are. Why? What's going on here? Let's shine the light here. What's going on?
Right. When I talk to church leaders, when I talk to friends who happen to be pastors and priests, and Genesis is not a literal account of what actually happened. It's just is that what you're telling your people on church on Sunday?
Right.
No, it's not. It's not, because I've been to church.
You're telling them it's literal, and you're trying to scare them so that they give to the offering plate.
And not only that, but I think in a lot of these cases, and this is just my, I guess, deduction, and it could be wrong, I could be off, but what I deduce is that these people are unwilling to tell their congregations about this stuff, about the fact that Genesis is not literally true, because they'll lose 75% of their audience.
Yeah.
They'll lose 75% of their tithing. their offerings and things like that. And you know, look, one of the churches that we attend is Woodland Hills Church here in Minnesota, headed by Pastor Greg Boyd, he's got a stack of books that he's written.
And this is all public information. So
all public information.
Whatever Ken says from this point forward is not to be considered as slanderous.
No.
Get this information out there.
What I want to say is that, like, he's talked about this before. He said, like, a few years ago, in one of his services, he talked about the idea that we shouldn't be involved in these foreign wars or something to that effect. He got political. And he lost a large, significant portion of his audience. They just said, we're not coming here anymore.
Sure.
We disagree with that. So I think that's the case, that when I go to my church and they're talking about literal Genesis and, Genesis, God created the heavens and the earth, and me, I'm wanting to throw my hand in the air and say, like, well, wait a minute. There had to be light before heavens and the earth because all matter comes from carbon. Carbon comes from exploded stars.
Sir, don't talk about that because the rest of the congregation doesn't want to hear that, and so we want to take care of what they want.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. It's funny. I was on the phone today, actually. I had a conversation with a church leader who actually joined us, Brian Bauer. He was on our show in the past. I can't remember which episode we talked about, but he was on the show with us briefly. And he said, it's one of those things about churches these days where a lot of people are getting fed up, and a lot of people are stopping going to church. And he says that I don't want to butcher his quote because I know he listens, but it was something to the effect of there's momentum. There's momentum that could either go in your favor, where a church is getting more progressive and learning and going forward and learning new things, and then there's the type that has the opposite momentum where it's keeping you from moving forward and it's pushing backward, meaning we want these old beliefs, we want these old ritualistic things. And, as a church leader, how do you maneuver that? How do you survive with that? And it's shameful. It really does become a business decision to try to move forward progressively with a congregation that maybe necessarily doesn't want that. Then are you just dumbing down the gospel, so to speak, so that you can keep in business?
Right.
And I think that's atrocious. And he's thankfully he is not in that situation. He's saying he's thankful because there is forward momentum and they are moving forward with more progressive mindsets and things like that. But it can be difficult in churches that he's seen in the past where the board or the elders or the congregation just doesn't want progressive movement, and that's scary.
And from where I sit, I see it all as like, at one time all this stuff was literal. This was literal, and then we have this discovery. Our knowledge expands like it's constantly doing. Like we're constantly experiencing this expansion of knowledge, and maybe we were wrong in that. God didn't create everything in 6 days. He just set the ball in motion.
See,
and then we pair back to the point eventually where we just go, you know what? This book is garbage, in my opinion.
I wouldn't knock a believer for taking that backward step. In fact, I applaud that because, to what, like you were saying, my heart breaks when I hear stories of historical science being met with Christian opposition. And it was like, why are you getting in the way? I think of, the 1700s or the 1800s where we were just teaching these poor, ignorant people, these innocent, ignorant people as children in our little schoolhouses and church houses that often were the same building in certain towns. And it's like, you think of Darwin, who went through the mental turmoil of, I believe in God, but this is what my science is teaching me, and now I'm having this dichotomy of, it's a needless stress, I feel, for believers who want to explore and learn and educate with science, to have, it's the Christopher Columbus thing. Christopher Columbus is like, okay, hey, Catholic Church, who's telling me that the world is flat, your frickin' book says it's a sphere.
Mm.
You know, why are you stopping me? You know what I mean? It's this. It breaks my heart when we have all these advancements that we have. I wonder how much more advancement we would have had we not had that old belief guard in the way of advancement. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And
so I can understand. I can understand where you're coming from when you're like, oh, you know, they're like, oh, well, maybe he didn't. I wouldn't knock that. I would applaud that. Say, yes, you're finally realizing maybe it's not as literal as you were thinking it always was or were told it always was. And that's hard for believers. That's really hard. It's hard for me to go, wow, I always thought it was one way. Now maybe it really is a different way than I've been thinking. And that can shake somebody.
But again, from my perspective, like, there are so many discrepancies and there are so many of these things that, like, we once held as truth.
Sure.
As absolute fact. And now science has said, like, just and logic and rationality and just the expansion of our knowledge overall as a human being says, well, this is not true. And the fact that there have been, and again, I feel like I keep beating a dead horse, and I don't mean to, but I think it's important.
There's always new listeners, so beat it.
There have been thousands of other religions that have all stated similar claims. We've all now decided, like, well, that's just mythology. What is the likelihood that this one book is actual fact and everything else is mythology? I can't wrap my mind around, like, how do we determine that this is the correct one? And how so many discrepancies.
Sure.
There's so much shit that's wrong with the Bible that, you know, I would argue, and I've heard other people argue, that the Bible is worse than the Quran in certain parts. The Old Testament
more misleading than anything.
I mean, you read the first 5, just please, if you're out there, you're listening right now within the sound of my voice, pick up the Bible and read the Old Testament, the first 5 books. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. Read them. They are some of the most awful things ever written in human history. They have the most awful impositions. Kill witches. Kill little kids for talking back to their parents. Kill people for eating shellfish. You kill people who, you know, homosexuals. It's just one thing after another. That this is supposedly the most moral book that's ever been produced. Hey, hand this to somebody and say, like, here, behave like this.
Yeah.
Let's see how far that gets you in our current society. You'll be in prison.
Apparently it didn't work back then either.
Right.
And I wonder, as a parent, how much of this is all the greater father story of, well, this didn't work. Well, that didn't work. You know what I mean? Because, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I've said some awfully horrendous shit to my kids. And when I've said it, I've gone back in my head going, man, I can't believe I did that. You know, and sometimes I apologize and I say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And sometimes I'm a stubborn bastard and I don't say anything. And I just do things differently.
Right.
Again, right or wrong, this is how I behave. And so, you know,
but you're God. You're God.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and before a bunch of Christians jump off and try to burn me at the stake, to a degree, I am the God of my house. And I mean that, you know.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know, metaphorically. So, yeah, you know, when I try to control things, it doesn't quite always work out the way I intend it to. So it's one of those things where I can kind of understand. I would never claim to understand the mind of this entity that allegedly wrote all these things or breathed life into all these things, so to speak. But I get little glimpses when I look at, oh, okay, well, I said this is how it's going to be, and then I went back on my word. Damn it, you know, that's where I said this or that, or it's. It's a lot to soak in, man. But I really like where we're going here. I really like this. This is very, it's eye-opening. It's very eye-opening for me personally.
Good. I'm glad. And with that being said, as long as you like where we're going, let's jump off and get into something else.
Good.
Just another thing that I wanted to bring up is this idea that when people say God damn it or Jesus Christ, they're taking the Lord's name in vain.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to sort of briefly touch on this because I don't think we've already talked at great length about the Ten Commandments.
Well, should we call this our new segment? Shall we introduce this to the public to our new segment? We are going to start a new segment each episode, ladies and gentlemen. We are calling Holy Crap. That's right. All the crap that we're not real sure if it's even real.
It's
so this week,
stuff that Christians do that just makes us sort of scratch our heads.
It's just some holy crap that we're not really sure. We could be wrong, and that's why we have an email address, pushthebuttonpodcast@gmail.com. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us why we're wrong. Or tell us we're right and tell us why we're right. Or just tell us that you love Ken's wrestling and all that stuff, but whatever.
So
this week, God damn it and Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. That's what we want to talk about. Now, I've been told since I was a little kid, like, these are the words you cannot say. You must avoid God damn it and Jesus Christ because you're taking the Lord's name in vain. It's
one of those 10 commandments.
That's one of the 10 commandments that actually
pre-10 commandments.
That actually wasn't in the 10 commandments.
Right.
But what they were referring, these Jews weren't walking around in the desert, wandering around the desert for 40 years, kicking rocks, saying, God damn it.
Well, from what I understand, the phrase God damn it is a request.
And people in the Bible walked around asking God to damn things all the time.
Yes. This smells like a justification, but go on.
God damn this man. This is not what that, I guess, what the sense was at the time.
So is the idea that you're making requests in vain? Is that what's going on?
Well, from what I gather from my research, my extensive research, is that, all it meant was you're not supposed to say that God told you to do something that he didn't actually tell you to do.
Ooh. Like,
hey, David, God told me that I could come and take your car, so that's what I'm going to do. God told me that I could, impound your car.
That sounds more in line with what I think than anything. And I think that happens a lot with Christians.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, these people weren't stubbing their toe saying, Jesus Christ. They didn't even know who Jesus Christ was.
What did Jesus even say when he did it?
I don't know.
Oh,
but what would he say, right? He would probably say, God damn it.
There'd be a lot of rocks in hell.
What if Jesus, when he was hammering away, accidentally missed the nail and hit his thumb? What would he say?
Oh, me.
God damn it. And just, I know this is kind of silly. And again,
we need that after the heavy.
Being sort of flip. Yeah, you're right. That was kind of heavy. But I am being sort of flip. But I hear this all the time from people. Like, if you say those two phrases, people get, ooh, please don't say that. Please don't say that. Or they'll go to great lengths to avoid it. And I believe, and I didn't do research on this, but I believe that it's something that our great-grandparents came up with. Like, don't say those things. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. That was their interpretation of it.
That would be a fun thing to research. Like, where did that phrase come from?
I do not believe that was the original intended meaning for that phrase. So,
getting into it, because I think the underlying theme here is the desire of an elder or a child to not be vulgar. I can't remember who said it, but somebody had said there is no such thing as a bad word.
Yes.
There is no such thing as a bad word. There could be ill intent. There could be malicious intent. but the word itself is just a verbiage in your language.
That was actually one of CM Punk's teachers.
Okay.
Said that. Well, I think you and I just listened to the same.
Oh, was that where it came from?
We listened to Punk's podcast, and or it was actually Cabana's podcast. It was an interview with CM Punk.
That's right.
About his departure from the WWE. And in that interview, he used a lot of expletives. He used the F word, 300 and some times, right? And he basically got a lot of heat from that and a lot of emails saying, like, did you need to use the F word so many times? And he told that story. He said, one of the only things that sticks with me from high school was this teacher said, there is no such thing as a bad word. And if you are offended by some word that I use, that's your fault.
Yeah. Yeah. How you take it is on you.
Yep. We communicate with each other. You know what I mean, and sometimes it's okay to say the F word.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things,
as I've gloriously proven in the past. But
one of the things that sticks with me from one of my speech teacher in high school said, words have no meaning. Meaning is up to the user.
Yeah.
And, to a degree, I would agree with that.
I mean, knowing that certain words cause an effect and choosing to still use them, that is something.
Yes. Yep.
There are certain racial words that can be chosen to be said or not, which, scientifically and aesthetically, the words mean nothing, but the mere utterance of them is quite powerful.
Yeah, quite divisive, and you can choose to go down that path, and that's totally up to you. But you're right. Like, what are the benefits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree with you to a very large extent that a lot of people are misconstruing taking the Lord's name in vain to mean somebody saying God damn something or to say Jesus Christ. And my dog agrees, clearly. And I think you're right on. I think it's saying that, the Lord led me to you because you need to give me $500 or God wants us to have sex, or
Joel Osteen constantly takes the Lord's name in vain, in my humble opinion.
Okay, I was going to say I have no way of knowing, and I wouldn't make that claim.
Well, all these televangelists that say that they convene regularly with God, they pray to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit tells them, "You need to send me some money."
Why do they all have Southern accents? I just want to know that.
And smile, and just those big smiles and those teeth. They always talk like this.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know why. When you go to seminary, do they teach you to talk like this?
I don't know.
Drives me insane.
I don't know. I never
right there,
that.
I immediately get my stomach starts churning in knots, and I just charlatan.
Yeah, you're taking the Lord's name in vain.
Yep. So one more thing.
Touch
on real quick is this idea that everybody ignores the Old Testament. We sort of talked about this earlier, and I said we were going to get back to it. But there's a new covenant with God. This was the old covenant. In the old covenant, we were allowed to keep slaves, and we were allowed to kill people whom we disagreed with, and we were allowed to kill children if they talked back to us, and kill homosexuals, etc., etc. But now God has softened his stance
in his old age.
Jesus came, exactly. And Jesus came and said, you don't have to do any of this. Well, we are to assume that Jesus is the ultimate authority in this situation, right?
For the sake of where this conversation needs to go, I will absolutely say that I do believe that Jesus was God's metaphorical last word, yes. Because I know what you want to bring up. So
whatever he says
should be what goes.
The law of the land.
I get you. I still think that God...
So we have a couple different instances. Jesus never says anything about, hey, whoa. This other stuff that we were doing previous. Because Jesus was not a Christian. He was a Jew.
He was a Jew. I have every belief that he followed a lot of the Jewish customs. A lot of them, but a lot of them he didn't, too.
And, there were several instances within the text of the New Testament. And again, from my standpoint, it's all myth. It's all mythology. However, people regard this as literal truth. Many people. This is an ancient telling of this story of how we are to behave. And Jesus has the last say. Jesus is the ultimate authority. And so I give for you, for your observation, a quote from Matthew chapter 5, verses 18 through 19, that says, "For truly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass the law," the Mosaic law he's referring to here, "until all is accomplished. Whoever then relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven." So what I take away from that is follow the Old Testament to the letter of the law, including stoning children for talking back, stoning people for eating shrimp, stoning people for wearing a cotton polyester blend, stoning people for yada, yada, yada. If you find out that your wife is not a virgin on the night of your wedding, you should take her to her father's doorstep and stone her to death. All of these commandments shall be followed until heaven and earth pass away.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Here's where I take this. Jesus is saying, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." We talked a little bit about that word fulfill and what it meant. "Truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Or, shall I say, until everything is finished." I think he was talking quite temporarily, implying that he himself is the sacrifice that pays for all of that law. And
that is an interpretation that...
Yeah, no.
He never says anything never says anything like that.
This is the same man who said, "I could, if you destroy this temple in 3 days, I will rebuild it." And they pulled him in front of the Sanhedrin and he said he could take the temple apart in 3 days and build it back up again. So yeah, he doesn't always say things that are quite literally. So I think this, and I have no problem saying this is my personal David Vox Mullen interpretation of that, but I want it said that it is an interpretation that's out there. That he was saying, hey, I'm not saying, because while he was alive, I would assume the law was still in effect. He didn't die for anyone's sins yet. So I think, my interpretation of this is him saying, until it is finished, definitely continue not killing people, continue not stealing from people, that sort of thing.
And so I don't mean to jump off here, but
no, it's okay.
part of Jesus' whole legacy was him going through life fulfilling this prophecy, right, that had been predicted in the Old Testament.
Again,
so
it depends on if you're talking about it literally or figuratively. I often considered him to be a figurative fulfillment of the prophecy.
Well, I mean, there's supposedly these very specific prophecies, like
things that would physically happen to his body and things.
Riding into the town backwards on a donkey. Look,
how unheard of that could have been.
Well, and not only that, but if I'm a Jew and I've read this information or this information has been passed along to me, and then I go and do it, hey, you know what? I'm going to sit backwards on a donkey and ride it into town. I just fulfilled the prophecy.
Right. That goes right back to that thing I was talking about. One of the early explorers who knew of the customs that were expected by a people and conquered that people by convincing them he was their God. It's the same thing. If that's what Jesus of Nazareth did, that in line is exactly what you're talking about.
And one more quote here from Luke.
Although I don't think he would have had control over them not breaking his legs on the cross and things like that.
Wow.
Just like the little
But
things
if
like
there
that.
were, I don't know. If you want to get into stuff like that, like we can also get into the idea that, like, in one of the fact is that there are 4 books in the Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're all accounts of Jesus' life.
Well after, yeah.
And his death. That's it. It just goes from, like, birth, his life, and his death, and the resurrection. In only a few, but they're all different from one another. They all give different accounts. If you read them side by side, you'd be amazed at the difference.
Yeah, and you can, too. I know that I'm sure I've seen websites in the past, but there's Bibles that literally do that, where they take all 4 Gospels, and they go chapter by chapter across, and they show, like, this is what Matthew said, this is what Mark said, this is what Luke said. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and it just, it's interesting to me, like you said, like, well, who's to say that, he couldn't have, those people wouldn't have broken his legs on the cross for him.
Well, up until they actually crucified him, I could definitely ride along with you on the concept of he knew it. He was a Jew. He was born and raised and around it. He knew what the customs were. He knew what the prophecies were. I could totally follow along that line of thought with you. But once he was no longer physically in control of his own actions, and the things that continued to happen that did coincide with that is just eerie.
You don't think it's possible that those people who were conducting those acts didn't have access to the same information that he had?
The Romans who wanted to beat the shit out of him?
Yeah. I don't think that they had access to information like, this is what the Jews believe. I don't know.
But why? But see, again, that would defeat the purpose if they made anything in line with what the. Don't forget that half the Jews, just like a lot of Christians who don't read the Old Testament, didn't remember half the crap that was in the Old Testament. It was the Pharisees who remembered. I think they made a point of, it was either Nicodemus or Joseph of Arimathea, who was at the foot of the cross when he was being crucified, who was now remembering, the words written in Isaiah and things like that about the prophecy, because nobody else remembered what the heck it was. Like, they went to these leaders who allegedly were theologians, so to speak, of their day. So I highly doubt that the Roman centurions and the soldiers who were tasked with carrying out a sentence on this guy were, even remote, just human nature. I don't think they were even remotely interested in any of that. So, like I said, I can totally ride along with the mindset of Jesus was pulling a con the whole time until they crucified him. But once it gets to the actual carrying out of the sentence on his physical body, I think there was very little he could control at that point.
And I would say, just for argument's sake, and this is actually what I believe, is like, what's more likely, that this was a historical account of this stuff that happened, or an author at a later date saying, like, here's what I want.
It'd be poetic license, you mean?
Here's what I think happened.
Sure.
And shoehorning some things in.
You're absolutely right, and that's a very big possibility.
And eyewitness testimony is the worst, one of the worst, pieces of, quote, evidence that we just saw this with the case in St. Louis, wherever.
St. Louis, Missouri, yeah, Ferguson.
A bunch of people said that the cop stood over the guy and shot him in the back a bunch of times. Well, then the coroner went and did the autopsy, and guess what? They didn't find any bullets in his back.
Yeah.
And they didn't find any bullets that matched up with that description of of that account of what happened.
But that's a discussion for another podcast.
Absolutely.
Another podcast.
But again, like, everybody always says, well, this eyewitness testimony, and all this eyewitness testimony to all these things, like
40 years later.
Did you really?
Yeah.
And even if you did, is that accurate? Is that to be relied upon?
Well,
I mean, it's funny because, like, they say in police lineups, 1/3 of the time in police lineups, the people are wrong in who they pick out. 33% of the time, they're wrong. So heaven forbid you ever get chosen for a lineup, or get wrongfully accused of a crime.
What was the percentage again?
33% of the time, people are wrong.
Jesus was crucified when he was 33.
Whoa. Ain't that a coincidence, gorilla? 9 plus 11 is 20.
I hate that you got that Minnesotan accent down better than I do.
So, and incidentally, they say that lie detectors are correct 95% of the time, or well over 90%, and they're inadmissible in court. So you've got something that's wrong a third of the time versus something, and that's admissible in court, this eyewitness testimony.
There's only one clear way to get this solved, Ken. We have to finish that time machine that you're working on.
Well, I'm working on it with Stewie Griffin, so shortly. Anyway, but what I'm trying to get at is that, like, in the New Testament, Jesus specifically says, in my opinion, and he says it a couple different ways, and it's interpreted by a couple different writers, you need to follow the Old Testament. He specifically says in Luke's chapter 16, verse 17, it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away. For heaven and earth. I don't know what heaven is, and I don't think anybody really does. We have interpretations of it.
Yeah.
But I know what earth is. I know what the earth is.
Right.
And I know that it's still here, as far as I can tell, unless I'm a brain in a vat. That earth still exists. It is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for the smallest part of the letter of the law, the Mosaic law, to become invalid. Stone children to death, stone people for eating lobster, so on and so forth. You must follow these, or you will not get into heaven. And I can see, like, it says that
which 10 Commandment law are we talking about?
No, it's not. It's Mosaic law. It's the 613. It's interesting that,
right.
We just choose these 10. These 10 are the most important. Well, there are 613 laws that are given by God to his people in the Old Testament. Period. Like, it's there. Go read it.
Yeah.
Kill witches. Kill homosexuals. That's it. There's no... It's stated clearly.
But homosexual witches are okay, right?
No, you would doubly kill those people. You would kill them, then you would have them resurrected.
That's just your interpretation, Ken.
Oh, that wasn't literal. That wasn't intended to be literal. That was just allegory. That was a parable. Anyway, pretty deep today.
No, I like it. It's good, and I will definitely say thank you for that, because I will definitely get off my butt and do some more research, because it's definitely worth looking at, and I'm going to ask a lot more people, and I'm going to see what they say, and I'm going to see where I come out on that, because it is it's very intriguing, man. Very intriguing.
And I would like to suggest and remind people, I know there's a lot of Christians out there who are listening to this right now that are going to go to a Christian apologist and get an answer and go like, that answers everything. I like it. Yep.
I'd like to learn more about...
Listen to both sides of the argument.
Yeah. I definitely urge people to learn more about society in that era. So, besides the Bible, what other information is out there? What other Hebrew or Levite or the old saying is history is written by the conquerors. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Because all these Canaanites and Shiites and all the other people who were conquered, what would they have had to say? And it's interesting to me that we only get to learn from those who have survived war. Huh? Good God!
And I'll just say, and I've said this before, but think about this. God had plenty of time to tell people what kind of tassels to wear on their clothing, how to make the tabernacle, how to make the Ark of the Covenant specifically. You have to have little angels on top. You have to have 2 poles. It has to be made out of gold, yada, 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 so on and so forth. This is how you slaughter animals to appease me. But he didn't have time to tell the people, wash your frickin' hands before you eat so you don't get germs and die. Because people died of their teeth. People, if you get a frickin' sliver back in the day, you're dead. You're dead. God didn't have time to say, like, yeah, guys, there are these little microorganisms called bacteria, and they can do bad stuff to you, so here's how to make soap. Wouldn't that have been more effective for the people? Wouldn't it have been more effective to say, like, here's how you make antibiotics?
No, I think there's definitely something to the line of what you pointed out, that a lot of these 600 and some odd laws really seemed, as an outsider's perspective, to benefit the early religious leaders. Yeah. And that's sad. And that does to me imply that there is the possibility that, again, if I believe that there is a God, that maybe he wasn't the one who gave this information.
Right.
And of course, on your end, you're like, I don't think any of it's real anyway. So, it's interesting, man. It's cool. It's worth looking at.
Yeah. And don't take my word for it. And don't take my, these are the, I guess, the realization that I myself have come to. And as I've said before, I continuously try to re-examine my entire life, all of my knowledge, and I'm presented with new information continuously, and I assess it and say, like, so, yeah. This is what I feel right now. Don't take my word for it. Go out, do some homework for yourself. Yep. However, I urge you, don't just take a Christian apologist's viewpoint.
Don't just listen to your pastor.
Yes. Don't go sit and just ask your pastor, and your pastor's going to give you some pat answer, in my opinion, that he's taken, that he's studied for 6 years in college, and they've told him, like, well, when they say this, I've always said, like, in my opinion, this is the way I feel, that it's seminary school is sort of like, Amway. I remember going to Amway meetings when I was like 19 years old, and they would say, like, well, what happens when somebody says that, hey, this is just a pyramid scam? Well, this is what you tell them.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So, I will say this as a person who does believe in God and somebody who has had questions just like these in the past with other issues. I have found that the greatest answers I have found usually come after I, as a believer, simply go to God and say, okay, you're not making any sense to me. Help me. Help me find out what I need to find out so that I can deal. Because right now you're not making any sense to me. And I guarantee you that's probably going to be the conversation that I do have with my God. And usually within, swift time, I find something, or I uncover something, or I learn something that goes, oh, okay. That makes it a little easier for me to breathe at night. And if I do come to that with this, I will definitely bring it to you. And just share with you what I found. Whether or not it's anything that's satisfactory to the listener, I can't speak. But if I get to a point where I have a piece about anything, I'll share it. I had similar things where I've had some friends, and we'll definitely talk about it in another episode because I know we got to roll. Yep. But I definitely had a conversation with a fellow Christian who went way off the rails into a very weird doctrine, and was very convincing about how we've been, doing it all wrong, and we're still accountable for our sins, and just like, and then it shook me. I thought, my God, I thought I was saved, but I'm going to hell again, I guess. I mean, it was weird, and it took some serious, God, what the heck is this stuff? And then I found things that we're kind of like, no, that's just, unfortunately, my friend has lost his mind. But it's, it's one of those things. So, and again, we're Americans, so let's just figure out how to live peacefully, man.
Yep.
But hey, everybody, have a Merry Christmas. And whatever it is you shall celebrate. Whether you believe in God or not, I'm sure you enjoy spending time with your loved ones and enjoying some good food and having, just good time to hang out.
Unless you're a dick.
Yeah.
Like doing any of that stuff.
Don't be a dick.
Yeah, don't. Just don't. Please. Just enjoy the season. Enjoy your family. The music, the food, the smells, everything.
The memories. That's what it's all about.
Yes. And above all, don't get hot.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Hey, can you push the button?
Do not touch that button.
Mr. Anderson.
Don't push it.
David Vox Mullen here to tell you all about what's new this fall on the DVM Podcast Empire. The new TV season is here, and we've got a great lineup for you. New shows like Gotham, The Flash, Forever, iZombie, Better Call Saul, Constantine, The Messengers, and Wayward Pines. We've also got new DVMPE original shows like Movie Mojo Monthly, Loot the Room, TV Resurrection, The Comic Book Podcast, Fangirl Zone, Push the Button, and The Windy City Rejects. And yes, all of your favorites are coming back as well, like the Podcast of Interest, Arrowcast, American Horrorcast, The New Who Podcast, Game of Thrones, Grimm, Once Upon a Time, The Walking Dead, and so much more. Of course, absolutely none of this would be possible without the support of our listeners just like you. So please consider your continuation of support by telling all of your friends about us, shopping online through our Amazon portals, or simply by donating directly at DVMPE.com. The DVM Podcast Empire. We don't just watch TV, we live it.